All right, welcome back to the Battery Podcast with your hosts, Joe Beimel and Brent Dean. And we are sponsored
Let's
by
go.
Beimel Elite Athletics in LA and Texas. All right, today's episode, we're going to
Awesome.
talk about arm injuries. It's a hot topic, has been for a while. You know, not only at the big league level, you see it at the youth level, high school level, college. People are just going down all over the place with usually elbow injuries. I mean, shoulder injuries are still there, but we're seeing a huge increase in Tommy John surgeries. So we just, we have our opinions and our theories and our ideas of what's going on. I think it's very trendy right now to blame it on velocity. I just saw like a video a couple days ago on Instagram where somebody was like blaming driveline for people getting hurt because, you know, pitchers are throwing too hard now. And it's just like, wait a second, what? Like, I don't believe that's a thing. Obviously, with the increase in velocity, if you don't have enough strength to back that up, that's going to put you at risk. But I have a couple other things, in this episode I want to talk about that no one's really talking about. And they're trying to blame it all on one specific thing, and I just don't think that's the case. So we've been doing this for a while, and I mean, actually, we have had very few arm injuries in our program. Like obviously you're going to have kids get hurt and they're going to get hurt on the field and stuff like that. And with all the high intent throwing and stuff that we do, I can count on two fingers, I think, people who have actually gotten hurt arm wise in the facility. But we do a lot of different things than most, so that's not surprising on our end. But just to start this off, in your opinion, what do you see as like the biggest, contributing factor to the increase in elbow injuries over the last few years?
Well, elbow injuries specifically, typically, one of the first things that we've noticed is that there's just a general weakness in the overall shoulder strength. And then it starts to radiate or project out to the more distal parts of the body. Um, Definitely, there's some type of lack of stress shielding within the elbow or lack of ability to sustain strength in the grip or in the pronators. But the first thing that we think of that has been kind of a core value of ours that has helped so many of our guys stay healthy is just strength, right? It's they don't have relative strength for the mechanics they have, for the volume they're throwing. They end up getting fatigued and they don't identify when they're getting fatigued. So they make compensations and they think it's a mechanical issue, but really it's a core strength issue. Um, that would be the number one thing. And number two is probably the mechanical breakdown that typically stems from a lack of strength. But those are highly tied together where it's not just one or the other, it is both. And I would say that you'd prioritize them in that order, strength and then mechanics.
Yeah, strength number one, always and for always and forever and whatever you want to say. But strength is always going to be number one, and that's obviously shoulder strength, and that's why we do the arm care program. It's the only program where you can test and retest with a dynamometer. So making sure one, your shoulder is strong, and two, it's balanced. You don't want to have this huge imbalance between your external rotation strength, your internal rotation strength, basically the muscles that accelerate your arm and then decelerate your arm after you release the ball. If you have, a lack of strength or that big, huge imbalance, either way, it can be one way or the other. It doesn't have to just be, it's pretty common to see internal rotation strength up a little higher than external. But with that being said, there are a lot of guys that have it the opposite, where their external rotation strength is way higher than their internal. And that's not good either. So it's just having that balance, doing the right things to keep it balanced, keep it strong. I'd say that's almost like the superficial thing to do like right now in the present. And then there's kind of like a false narrative out there too that if you have perfect mechanics, then that's going to help you stay healthy. And a lot of times that can be true if your strength is good. But if your strength is bad and you have perfect mechanics, that's going to send so much more energy up the chain into your arm. And if you don't have the strength to be able to handle, that newfound velocity or that, that torque that goes into your shoulder and elbow, then you're kind of screwed there too. So the perfect mechanics aren't really going to help you in that scenario. Um, Now, like we say, we talk about velocity and velocity's up, so then arm injuries are up. But I mean, I threw as hard as I could for as long as I could since I was a kid. So, and granted, I wasn't throwing 100 miles an hour every pitch or max effort every pitch when I played. But one of the biggest things I see is I think right now we are in the travel ball era. So you're seeing people at the big league level, college level, high school level that all played year round baseball. They all played travel ball. And some of these guys are just throwing so much at a young age. And I think that finally catches up to them, when they are at the older levels and the more advanced levels, because we see this all the time. Kid plays on 5 different travel teams and none of them talk. It's not like they're hanging out talking to each other like, oh, did this guy pitch? This guy pitch? No, they're just going by the rules of the tournament. And you'll see, can you hear that? Bo is like screaming.
Yeah,
Hold on real
that's
quick.
right.
Hold on. He's
Just
like
a
on his
reminder,
iPad.
we are, yeah, just
Yeah.
playing.
He's on an iPad and I'm like, hey, like he's not paying. He's just on it like
Like nothing, locked in.
zoned
Yeah.
me out. Yeah. All right. But, we're talking about travel ball, and you just see so many times where kids are going to tournaments and it's like there's a game at 8 o'clock in the morning and then there's a game at, 5 p.m. And the coach will pull the kid out of the first game because, he only threw 2 innings and he wants to save him so he can pitch him that night. And you're just like, wait a second, what? You're pitching twice in one day? Like, you can't do that. Like, I did that twice in my big league career. I pitched both games of a doubleheader, and it was not easy. Like, you can't have 7-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 12-year-olds doing this every single weekend. It makes
15-year-olds,
no sense.
20-year-olds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
exactly. And it starts at that young age. So I think we're seeing the effects of that even in the big leagues now, because most guys that are in the big leagues played travel ball. Like I didn't even have it. It wasn't even an option. So there were fewer surgeries back then because if you had basically any damage to your arm, it was usually from your time in the big leagues. For myself, my first 3 years, I just got abused. I was up or in the game pretty much every single game. Um, and that took a toll, but I had Tommy John surgery at 35 years old. I didn't have it at 15 because I was playing baseball during baseball season. Um, and that's not to say that's the right way to go. Like, I don't think playing year round is necessarily a bad thing, but it's got to have some kind of limitations on it. You can't have kids throwing, and you get a fully developed adult and they're throwing 100 pitches in a game. And then everyone thinks like a 12-year-old can throw 100 pitches too. And it's just like, what are you doing? Don't do that. I was just talking to a parent a couple days ago and they were saying, his son's a pretty good pitcher. And they were saying the coach, because they play on Tuesdays and Thursdays, they have two pretty good pitchers on their team and they want to pitch one of them like 3 innings on Tuesday and then bring the other one in for 3 innings and then day off and then pitch 3 innings on Thursday and the other pitch 3 innings. Cause that's only 6 innings. I'm just like, what are you talking about? That's terrible. Why don't you just pitch one 6 innings on
Mhm.
Tuesday and the other one 6 innings on Thursday? What's that is way more um I mean, that is way better for your arm, for your body to do that like once a week than just having one day off and coming back and throwing 3 more innings. I don't think a lot of people realize the toll that takes on your body. And then that builds up year after year after year. And it's just, detrimental to these kids and these big leaguers' arms. Um,
Definitely,
Now with
definitely.
this, what I know you coached a little bit in travel ball, in the off seasons and things like that. Did you see? And this was obviously you're old as shit, so this was a long time ago. But
Yeah, what
um,
decade was this?
yeah, but what
Yeah,
was that?
well,
Like
good.
2010, 2011, or no? Not. I guess it
Yeah,
would have been after
2010,
that.
2010, I started coaching travel ball regularly in the off seasons. 2009, my first year in pro ball, just finished at UCLA. I do some random lessons and occasionally like a camp or clinic, like catching camps and hitting clinics and those types of things in the off seasons, or even in the summers or with UCLA, like at their camps. But yeah, 2010, I started doing travel ball, and the game's changed dramatically. So I want to contextualize this and let people know that the information that's available to parents and athletes has dramatically improved over the last 10 to 15 years, let alone the last 5 years. But the safeguards that are in place and like the pitch counts and the volume for the rules on how much someone's playing are still just general guidelines that don't account for everyone's volume of everything they have going on in their life. They're not going home and seeing if they're sleeping enough, like what they're doing outside of that, if they have a side travel team, like you mentioned. All right.
DND,
D&D, man. I have it on D&D. I
DND,
gotta change the settings. I gotta just put this on the computer because these spam calls just come in nonstop, and they'll call 3 or
telemarketers.
4 times, and I'm like, "All right." Telemarketers are ruthless at this time
Yeah,
of the year. Travel ball continues to improve, but the volume of time that a lot of athletes are spending playing is usually not relative to the volume or intensity or focus of time they're spending with their preparation and their recovery. And that is directly leading to injury. There's so many athletes that have no idea on the trends of their health. So they go into the season feeling good. They're throwing, they're pitching. They can manage a weekend where they throw a Saturday and a Sunday. So their coach just assumes, okay, this 10, 13-year-old, 15-year-old, 20-year-old even can manage that. But there's very little accountability on checking up to see if they're able to sustain that, especially pretty much every level lower than most D1 schools don't have that level of accountability. And we see that with arm care. And arm care for a lot of people is kind of like a buzzword, right? You're like, oh, arm care. Yeah, that means I do some bands, I stretch out, I have like a little plyo ball routine. In reality, it does have to revolve around their entirety of their strength program, as well as their mechanics, as well as their general trends in their health. And that's why we have arm care as part of our core foundation in our health cross checking to make sure that athletes are just prepared. They can manage the volume that week, not just in general. And you think that kid throws one time and he does fine, that he can do that every time. And I mean, we've seen that even at college level. Guy goes a complete game, throws 100 plus pitches, comes the next week, throws on a short rest and does okay. And you see it in like the second or third week after where it starts catching up with him. Even for guys that have decent routines and decent preparation, they're still young athletes and they haven't adapted to that volume. Because if you're getting compared to someone like on a big league level, that doesn't mean that they're going to be able to execute with the same consistency. So I'd say a big part of the youth travel ball culture revolves around winning games. And I think that's a flaw. I think it should revolve around teaching the game at the fundamental level, should revolve around competition and trying to win with the understanding that their development is super important at that point. Um, Physically, but then also mentally, like they should be intrinsically really motivated to compete and be there at practice and enjoy baseball. And we've talked about this recently where there's just so many teams, even high schools, they avoid coaching fundamentals. And that's the whole point of youth baseball is that you have a chance to learn the fundamentals, fail in situations, learn again, have it reinforced, and allow your physicality to develop at a pace that's going to be manageable and sustainable for you. You know, not every kid is 6'4", 220 in high school or will ever be that big. So you can't train everyone or coach everyone or let them pitch to the same volume as you would a guy that's just physically able to sustain it. And then the oversights typically happen. The athletes that are the best, the most prepared, throw the hardest, physically look the strongest, they get used the most when they're younger. And then again, to high school with this like litany of fatigue and minor injuries that end up becoming secondary injuries. And then they just ignore it. They think like, oh, it's fine. He had this when he was 12, but he won't have it in high school. I'm like, well, that's probably cause of his routine and cause of his volume of workload that he's just ignoring. Um, but yeah, the travel ball game, the college recruiting game, um, the amount of information that's available now has just in the best way possible improved so much, but we're still seeing a ton of injuries because of like the core foundation of people just not using the trends or really understanding how they can individually identify where they are rather than just on this like general rule of okay, you can only throw 100 pitches per week. But some maybe they can only manage 20 or 25, or it changes dynamically throughout the season. And especially somewhere here like California, it's 75 and sunny most months. So you can play outside and you can pitch year round if you want to. You can find a team that'll take you. They invite you to tournaments so you can travel. And we have a lot of those kids. We have a lot of those kids that have played since 10, 11, you know, 5 in travel ball organizations, doing lessons, doing weekend tournaments. And those are usually the ones that have a significant amount of issues when they get older if they haven't taken the time to focus on specific windows of adaptation that have identified where they're lacking. Generally, it's strength. And it's a low hanging fruit. It's obvious most 13 to 20-year-olds need to get bigger, stronger, have a better bandwidth or a capacity to train. And then you can start getting specialized once they've hit that where it's a little safer, it protects them, and then they can push with the tools that they have developed versus having an empty toolbox and you're just throwing it out there and you haven't gotten better since you were 12 years old. It's like you're still throwing 78 miles an hour and it's first not going to be effective very long. And second, you're probably going to risk injury because as you're getting stronger, the other structures maybe haven't caught up. But yeah, what's
Yeah, that's
your
a
perspective on that?
well, yeah, I
Go
think
ahead.
one thing that you can be super strong as well, but it doesn't mean you're not fatigable. As you know what I mean? So you can have two kids, you
Right.
can have one
Right.
that's 6'3", 200 pounds, and you can have another one that's 6'3", 200 pounds. They can be the exact same strength. They can have, they can throw just as hard as each other. You can have identical people, but one might get super fatigable after 30 or 40 pitches, and the other one might not get fatigable until maybe 80, where you would give them a test and you would see after they threw, one of them might, their strength maybe goes up a little bit from like a fresh exam that they would have done earlier in the week. And maybe one just completely crashes because they just can't handle that workload. It's just very bio individual. So you have to be able to know what is what. You can't treat everybody the same, and with training has gotten so much better over the years. Obviously, when we were younger, it was just like, here, go do this. Everybody who plays in the Pirates organization, here's your folder. This is what you do. Everybody does it. Doesn't matter if you're a position player, pitcher, whatever. And, over the years, even when I was in college, it was like that. So over the years, and especially with our program, we've become so much more individualized where you're looking at these different numbers. You're going like, hey, your arm care strength is down this week. We're going to have to switch up your program to maybe you only work out twice this week instead of 3 times or 4 times or whatever. Or you threw 100 pitches in your game yesterday. All right, you're going to pitch again in 6 days, say. Well, you just threw 100 pitches. Let's back off of a couple things and focus more on, your recovery and different things that we can do to get you back to 100%. And we'll make sure we're testing in between so we know these things. And it really is that difficult. It's not just this easy thing that you can just cruise through. And if you want to play at a high level, you're just going to go out and pitch as many games as you can and play for 20 different freaking travel teams. And you're going to throw more innings in a season than Clayton Kershaw. It's just that stuff can't
Right.
happen.
Yeah.
And I always say this too is, like my cousin, who's coach of a high school team, he'll ask me, "Hey, how many pitches you think so and so should throw, whatever?" And it usually depends. It's like, well, every kid isn't the same either at those levels, right? Because some of these kids in high school, after their senior year, they'll never play baseball again. So they can do whatever they want. They can throw whenever they want. But if you got a kid who's talented, he's going to move on. He's going to play in college. He's got potential to be a professional. Those are the guys that you got to kind of like look out for and watch for and treat them a little bit different because they're not done after this senior year. They have at least 4 more years and then maybe, even longer than that. So you've got to really plan for those type of things. Um, but that is the biggest thing with all of this is that all of these programs, they should be bio-individual to the athlete. And a lot of times it's not done like that because that is hard. That's hard to do. It's hard to do at our level of training. And this is all we do. We don't have to worry about winning games. We don't have a team out there that's trying to win a World Series or trying to, win a college championship or anything like that. Our goal is to just develop players to be the best athletes and the best baseball players they can be. So we're not in the business of winning baseball games. We're in the business of creating and helping players to win baseball games for their team, but we don't have the team to worry about. And that's where I think a lot of programs, a lot of high schools, colleges, they do have all that stuff. So that just creates another intricacy. If you have to like look out for all of the development side of things. And that's why we always step in and can do that kind of thing. And that's why it always works out better when we're involved, with the school or, they send guys to us and we stay in communication with their coaches and things like that. But as you know, ego plays a big part of things and coaches don't want to think like, oh, we don't want them to go over there. All they do is this, all they do is that. When if they sat down and talked to us and realized like, hey, this is what we're doing. We're helping in this many ways. And they're not just coming in and doing pull downs and throwing max intent bullpens and whatever they think is going on. But back to like the arm care and the arm injury thing, it like I said, I think it starts at the youth level. It starts in travel ball. I think that like anything, you want to set a good foundation for a young kid. Like if we get a young kid in our program, we are from day one establishing like a foundation of good habits, good strength habits, a good base, and that's always first and foremost with us. And then, we have the pyramids or whatever we got, on the things in the facility where up to the top of the pyramid just becomes more specialized. The base is obviously strength first and foremost, but that's how we're treating the youth athletes. But if we're doing something different, that's going to be really bad for further down the road. They're just going to crumble. And that's what's happening with a lot of kids. I mean, kids are getting hurt now in little league age, not really anybody's playing little league anymore, but, the young travel ball teams, high school. And it's so common to just have a kid go, "Hey, I got an MRI and I have a tear, so I need Tommy John." They're like, "Wait, but you're only 15. Like, what's going on?" That stuff never used to happen. You might have had like a freak accident with somebody, but really never happened at that age back when we were younger. So, um, obviously you have the foundational period when you're young, and then as you get older, and I mean, I still see it with like big league guys now that we work with. It's like, hey, get do some arm care exams in season so you know where you're at. And I've heard like, oh, well, I don't want to do that because I don't want it to be in my head if my score is low. And I'm just like, what are you talking about? Like, really, you're that big of a mental midget? You can't do an arm care exam. Um, but actually, I don't know if that's I'm allowed to say that, mental midget, mental little person, I guess we can say. But um,
Yeah.
anyways, so, it's just instead of doing something that's going to help and catch something quickly, they're like, "Oh, I can't do that because then I'll be like domed up if my score's low." And it's like, well, if your score's low, it doesn't mean you're throwing slow or you're going to have a bad game. It just means you got to be aware of this, in between starts, and you should be doing more for whatever is lacking in those areas. Um, you know, uh, I think a lot of emphasis too is there isn't a whole lot you can do for the elbow. And you talked about it earlier. You can do like some stress shielding exercises, but you're also throwing a lot. Your grip is getting worked. If you start fatiguing your grip and different things in season, that creates its own problems. So there's not a whole lot. You don't want to just burn out your freaking grip. And, you get in the rice bucket and you can do some grip exercises or hanging by two fingers from a pull-up bar or holding a kettlebell with two fingers and doing some carries and things like that. There's nothing wrong with that, but I see a lot of guys too. It's like, oh, my elbow's hurting. So they start just freaking maxing out like the grip strength stuff that, and then they end up blowing out and they can't figure out why. And it's like, well, you fatigued your grip and you fatigued yourself so bad. So that brings us to the next point with fatigue. Fatigue is obviously an enemy to health. Um, so certain kinds of fatigue aren't bad when you're talking about, or stresses, I guess, not necessarily fatigue. If you're talking about, different things that stress your body, but in a good way, like a ice bath or breath work or different things like that. Um, Is there anything, I know you had like some elbow issues, right, when you were in college. What would you say was the biggest thing that helped you, because obviously you avoided surgery, um, and I don't know what you did to kind of get yourself healthy again, but is there anything in particular that you did where you're just like, hey, this really worked for me? Or was it just something where you started managing fatigue better? Or I know obviously we talked in the last episode about just throwing mechanics and how they kind of spiraled a little bit, but what would you say was the biggest factor that helped you recover from that?
Well, first thing, I think the last 5-10 minutes of everything you just talked about, um, if you're listening to this, go back and listen to that again. There's so many key points you hit on that are just absolute gold, and we can unpack a lot of those things over the next hour, over the next few episodes. But if you got questions on any of that, definitely reach out because there's some things you mentioned on there, even with like our decision tree, like having, the foundational strength, consistency, and how we work up that process with like speed and power and mobility. And then kind of at the top are mechanics and endurance and some of the specialized skills. That's where a lot of people spend so much of their time working on this like lessons model process where they haven't really built the capacity to even train at the level that they really want to play at the next level. And they kind of lose their windows because they don't have a good understanding of how to have quality windows of adaptation. But for myself personally, and if you're an athlete that has elbow issues or constantly has fatigue in their body and their throwing arm specifically, I would say the first thing you need to do is identify where those weaknesses are. That's why we use a dynamometer system. We can see quantifiably what it is. And if it's an imbalance, if it's a general strength, if it's targeted, if it's trending or stimulated in certain areas, like the amount you're gripping, excuse me, the efficiency in your mechanics, or it's just a general strength issue that you've never addressed. A lot of these issues are super preventable and also can be intervened on relatively quickly to avoid the poor performance of the pain that a lot of athletes are experiencing. For myself personally, one of the windows that you're talking about, when I was at UCLA through the fall, you have the Blue Gold World Series. And a lot of colleges do this. It's basically inter squad, captains pick the teams, you go head to head. It's just an opportunity for you guys to like compete at the end of the fall, or last opportunity for coaches to evaluate competition of, who their guys are, weekend starters and everything. And this was like my junior year at UCLA, and I'm going off. I think I had a couple home runs, throwing guys out, catching really well. We're winning. For whatever reason, I must have just been super fatigued. And I know I did this recklessly a handful of times, and just staying up all night, um, have 6 a.m. weights, and I'm studying till 1 or 2 a.m. I'm going pre-med. So I'm trying to like get ahead on some of that stuff. And then also socializing, staying up way too late, just hanging out. We were playing like Guitar Hero and Halo, some of these games.
Love that game.
But I tweaked. Oh my god, yeah. But I tweaked something in my pronator, right? Pronator teres, I believe it was, and then I had no idea. I just started wearing a sleeve. I was like, it doesn't feel good. I'll dig into it, and I was that type of guy. I was like, okay, well, I'll just do a ton more of rice bucket, or like the pronator flexor routines with a bat or with a little hammer, um, grip strength stuff. So my forearms were always like pumped up, right? Like I always had like big forearms, and I thought that was like how you're supposed to prevent that stuff. The reality of it was I had super weak stabilizers in my shoulder. I had probably a super weak rotator cuff. I didn't have something like the arm care dynamometer system that's available to everyone now. And once I started working on that, it started to dissipate. It started to go away. I didn't notice it nearly as much. And I started thinking about it as you're explaining these things, like kind of how you can identify where you are in that. Because in reality, it's kind of like this cycle. Like you have to prepare, you have to have the capacity to train or to throw or to just play at the volume you need to. Then you need to understand the volume and intensity you're being used. And then you need to identify fatigue, prepare again, go back through that cycle. And what happens is that cycle gets really fast for some guys. They're getting used too much, or they don't identify how they're actually trending in those areas, or they start using way more compensation than they did, and they have these quick changes in their routines. And even like how you mentioned with arm strength, meaning like if we're testing the internal and external rotation strength, like your subscapularis versus your rotator cuff, teres minor, whatever, just without getting too medical technical on it, if there's an imbalance, it's not necessarily a big deal. If it's a major imbalance, you usually want to change, want to like intervene with that. Mike Reinold versus Ryan Croton, they have slightly differing views on it, but they can usually agree that it's okay, except for when there's quick changes. And all of a sudden you went from having maybe like a 75% ratio internal dominance to then all of a sudden it flips, or it gets way worse, like a 15% change in a week or 2 weeks. What that typically means is there's a fatigue that isn't being addressed. So you're starting to compensate. And if you're compensating by what most athletes do is they throw to the path of least resistance, like you were up here and now all of a sudden you're down here. You start kind of like taking the pressure off your elbow and like pushing it out. That's what I did. Then you start having poor arm path, and people think it's a mechanical issue, which maybe that's the execution of things and you're throwing differently. But that's kind of just a symptom of the main cause, which is you have a strength issue that has not been addressed. So for myself, at UCLA, and even once again later in my career with Milwaukee when I was with the Brewers, it really, and I had no idea about this, but it really revolved around understanding how to train strength relative for my arm and not just like a bodybuilder. It wasn't staying in the gym doing more bench press, more squats. It was scap stability. It was mobility in my T spine. It was synchronizing properly, making sure that I just was holding isometrically in the proper positions and I wasn't getting my arm up super late. So creating that super steep slope and max external rotation and not holding that. Um, the routines that I started to establish were really very, I mean, basic J bands and the TIs and Ys and some TRX stuff. But now with a program like crossover symmetry and arm care, that's a lot more personalized and it adapts more quickly. And that's where, I mean, we feel comfortable and they feel comfortable as a company. They have that $10,000 guarantee that if you follow it, specifically how it says and how it advises, they'll give you $10,000 if you end up getting hurt and need surgery because they're like, well, you shouldn't. It tells you you need to stop and you need to intervene, you need to make some changes. But what most people do is they don't identify that they're on that. And I'm back.
There we go.
Jesus. Yeah. So what I was saying is they don't
I was just like,
identify
yep, he'll be
where
back.
they are in that trend. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's my whole point. It's just agreeing with what you said. And like I mentioned, there's so many things that you touched on. So I wanted to let you finish your thought because there's about 7 or 8 different bullet points that we could stick on for a good 10 to 15 minutes each one and just really dive into what that means. There's a lot of things that we talk about and it feels like common sense to us, so we kind of just brush over it. But that's really the core conversation that we end up having with so many parents and athletes is they don't understand where they are at that time. And they think, oh, well, my coach has like this throwing program or we have a good strength program. And then we start asking clarifying questions like, okay, well, what does exactly mean for you? And how do you adapt if this happens or this happens? Or, okay, if you're a athlete looking for a training facility, listen carefully. Like you need to make sure there's someone that understands how to identify the trends that are happening and intervene when necessary or leave you alone. Get out of your head. Stop getting so overly analytical to where now you're just internally cueing everything. So that's such a huge point, and you mentioned it. The reason why most other places don't do this is it's really challenging. We spend a significant amount of time and we have to train our trainers to really understand when to intervene and when not to. How do you identify if someone's biomechanical report is optimal, suboptimal, changes are necessary, or it's part of their threshold that they operate in and they get to that point? And if it's a strength issue or a mechanical issue or both, what's the point of any of the changes we make in their routines? So I think, I mean, and I'm biased because I've known you for so long. I think you're such a wizard at identifying things and making some changes that are necessary and also being tactical enough to go, okay, let's just see how he adapts to this and let's give him a chance to make some changes without changing the way he throws the first day we see him. And I see that's a lot of common places, teams, coaches, facilities that kind of just put you in this pattern and go, all right, good luck. So many things to touch on there. Back to just to my experience, though, the fatigue issue was probably at a core root of lack of strength. And then the volume at which I was playing was just so high compared to what you're used to. That's usually a very core process or a very common denominator to a lot of the issues that end up arising with injuries. So it just dumped another big
Yeah, I
load
mean,
on your plate right there. Like, a lot to
well,
unpack
no,
there again.
yeah, just I think it's a good point too because obviously you went to UCLA and we see so many guys that will train and they might be in high school
Yeah.
and not really realizing the kind of program that they're doing. Like they're getting a pro level like program, the attention they're getting to detail in their programming. And I feel like some of them kind of take it for granted because they just don't know the decisions and the thought process and what's going into what they're looking at on their phone when they come in to train with us, and they will go to like a D1. And you would think, and this is no knock on any of these schools, well, maybe a little bit, but you know, just because you go to a D1 school doesn't mean you have like an elite program or strength program or whatever, and like even going to UCLA, I'm sure you didn't have a specific baseball weightlifting coach. Your weightlifting coach probably coaches the football team and everything else. And maybe it's getting better at that, but I've just watched so many guys go away to school and they go to a D1 and they leave, and then they think like, oh, I got to do this. I got to do this program that they gave me. And I'll be like, well, I don't know. Like, you should probably keep doing what you've been doing that's been successful for you. But they feel they've got to switch it up. And then we'll look at some of these programs, and I mean, they're terrible. I mean, it's the only way to say it. Like, their strength programs, I'm just like, what are they doing? But it's one of those things where it's given to all the pitchers, or it's given to all the position players. And it's somebody who has whatever kind of either CSCS or NASM or whatever. I don't know if you can have a NASM and be a college coach, but
Yeah, CSCS
with that
usually.
being
Yeah.
said, yeah, just because you have that doesn't mean you might understand, um, strength and conditioning for the general population. But unless you've trained all of the different sports, you're not going to know, the needs of every single one. And we have had that, not only with ourselves and having um, long careers. You don't have a long career, especially this day and age, without the strength side of things. You've got to have those type of things. And both of us have learned so much from so many people over the years. So a lot of the stuff that we learn and that we know, it's not like shit that we came up with. It's stuff that we've learned from people that are way smarter than us. So we've kind of taken a lot of things and incorporated into what we're doing. And you don't necessarily see that at the college level. And I think some of your top programs throughout the nation are like that. And they're everyone's getting better all the time. But, it's just super common to see guys go in the fall and they just like, what are you guys doing? This just isn't going to help you in the long run. It's not going to help you stay healthy. And that's what usually happens. Poor performance or injuries start to happen. And then they start to come back around like, oh, I got to start doing this stuff again. When that shouldn't have to be the case. But going back to, what we're kind of talking about, I, even at the big league level, you'll see a lot of this, but how many times you hear about pitch count, right? So I think pitch count has its place, but pro ball, big leagues, guys are still getting hurt like at a crazy rate, but they're still so stuck on like the pitch count instead of, going, hey, maybe we should test this guy after every start and see how much strength they lose. And then based on how much strength they lose after this start, maybe that's how we help them the next start, or maybe that changes their routine in between starts for the next 4 days. All right. So if you're in the big leagues, you're starting every fifth day. Say you throw a game and you only throw 50 pitches, and then they go, well, you got some rest, you didn't throw that much, so the next time out you'll be able to throw 110 or whatever. Instead of going like, man, maybe those 50 pitches really taxed him. And so we'll test him and see where he's at and go, oh, wow, he lost a lot of strength. He lost more strength in that outing throwing 50 pitches than he did the time before when he threw 95, and that's a thing because every day is different. You have different stressors. You have, you know, players always say they're not robots. So it's not like you just do the same. You have the same thing going on at home. You have the same thing that you ate. Everything's different. It might be a little hotter, it might be a little colder. You just have to realize all of these things play a factor, and they play a factor in your fatigue. They play a factor in your performance. And not to sit there and say like, oh, you got to use these as excuses. Like, oh, it was only 40 degrees when I pitched. That's why I pitched bad. That's not what I'm talking about. It's just different things are going to cause different stressors, different fatigue levels. So knowing these is how you kind of prepare yourself to, one, be ready for it. But then two, if something happens where you lose a bunch of strength in an outing, it's not to say you can't pitch the next time, but it's like, now we got to do something different in between starts. So maybe we don't throw a bullpen in between starts this time. Or maybe we back it down to just 10 fastballs or something. You pitch your whole life. You're not going to lose your mechanics, and you're not going to forget how to pitch in 5 days, So maybe you do something different with your routine. Or maybe you throw 90 pitches and you test and you're like, man, I feel really good. I can probably go 90 the next time out, or maybe I can go 100. These are just decisions that need to be made even at these higher levels that I don't think are really being made. I think it's just we're still looking at pitch count. It's like, oh, you can't go over 100 pitches. Well, why? Because that just became a thing not that long ago, probably when I started playing. Pitch counts were huge. But they didn't save anybody from getting hurt. It's still happening. People are still getting hurt even more. So like the pitch count, the fact that you're still worrying about it is just like, that doesn't make any sense to me, because it's not helping anything. And we had a pro guy last year, a couple of years ago. He wanted to delay like his off-season program because he's like, oh man, well, I pitched 120 innings this year. And I was just like, what are you talking about? Like in 2000, I threw almost 190 innings in the minor leagues. I mean, today, if you did that, you'd be freaking fired, So I would have been like, I think back then I was one of the top guys in the minor leagues for innings pitched, which, 180 some innings, that's a lot. But at the big league level that year, I probably wouldn't have been top 25. But if I would have thrown 180 some innings this past year, I'd have been like top 5 in the big leagues, because no one threw that. So it's just the lack of innings, the lack of pitches, that's not keeping people healthy. So we have to abandon that ideology. And not to say, I take that back. Not necessarily abandon it, but you have to put less importance on it. And that's, I feel, the only way to help with arm injuries. You have to put more emphasis on strength and what you're doing in between, based on testing, retesting. We test and we retest everything, like whether it's velocity or exit velocity or all these different things through the course of a season, but we just forget about the strength side. So I think that can be a huge factor to kind of solve, and not to say you'll ever solve, injuries. When you're pushing the body to the peak of like what a human can do, you're going to have injuries, but it doesn't happen with running. You've had guys in like the Olympics and in track, they're constantly pushing those numbers, and they have been since the beginning of time, and humans just keep getting faster. And off topic, it's kind of like the old guys in baseball, where for some reason, baseball players just feel like that's not the case in baseball. Like everyone's like, oh, guys don't throw harder. They just have better instruments to, better radar guns than they had, or the radar gun picks up the ball here instead of here. When I played, I would have thrown 100 on the guns now. And it's just like, no. I played like in both eras, and that's not the case. It's just better training. People are bigger, stronger, faster, like they have continued to get through the course of time. It's just the way it happens. People are getting smarter. There's more information available. But with that being said, it's not helping with, injuries. So that's where I think we need to kind of shift what we're doing. And we have done that with our training facilities because we take all of those things into account. When a kid comes in, um, they do an arm care exam. Oh, that arm care exam's way down this week. Let's kind of see why, see how they pitched, how many innings they pitched. Let's, change up the routine in the weight room. Let's change up his mobility. Let's give him some more, maybe program him some red light or PEMF or whatever it is, more than we usually do, just because these numbers are down. Because it doesn't make sense to just go, yeah, the numbers are down, but who cares? Let's just keep doing what we were doing. And that's typically how guys
Yeah.
are going to get hurt.
Yeah. I'd say, I mean, you hit on another just great group of points there. But here's the truth about programs is they don't all work, and it's not one size fits all for everything. And the reality is there's so many things that have to be taken into consideration. There's so much nuance and variables that if you're not working on those things, they end up becoming the issue. And if you don't identify it at that point, you're higher risk for injury or higher risk to poorly perform, period. Perform poorly. But the point you kept breaking down or bringing up was there's so much information, and the game keeps getting better and athletes keep getting better. The reality is injury is inevitable in sports, but it's not for lack of trying, it's not for lack of information. It's typically because there's too many variables to have to consider for everyone that most people don't, right? So, like, here, stay with
Yeah.
me on this. So, what I'm thinking is there's programs. I mean, call it a college program where they do have a strength program. They have a throwing program. They have a good understanding of trying to get you nutrition and teaching you everything. Their primary goal first is to develop you so that you can perform so that they can win. Eventually, in the season, the bias in their decisions goes to who's the best option to help us win. And it starts to pivot away from how are we developing this guy and how is he taking care of himself on a day to day, because the focus is back on the team. In our world, the focus is on the individual variables that are happening. And we're trying to intervene in that space constantly. That's extremely difficult. First, it takes some experience, it takes some data, and it takes some tact to be able to know what exactly you're looking at, because it's not obvious, like the low hanging fruit for a lot of athletes, which is just, okay, you got to get bigger and stronger. Your strength is down. For us,
Yeah.
you start getting athletes that are already pretty talented or pretty big and pretty strong or throw pretty hard or they do something well. How do you sustain it? Or how do you push a little bit, like get the extra tip of that spear, that top of that performance level where they can throw 97 instead of 95? Very often it's not obvious. You can try different things, but like anything, the strength program at UCLA or some random gym or a pitching coach that has a track man, if they're not considering all of the other variables that go into that athlete's day to day and they start just giving you the same routines as everyone else, there's performance that's left off the table, or you're risking injury at certain windows, but maybe that athlete just has a big enough engine and great enough capacity where they can manage it. That's kind of what I'm realizing in all these years now of being kind of on the player development side is there's really nothing that's one size fits all. You have philosophies, you have ideas, even like mechanical efficiency. You could have the best mechanics and still risk injury because you didn't understand the other variables. That's what I've seen as well in a lot of the training programs and travel teams and high school teams is they'll have a good program or they'll have something that's worked for them. They're winning, they have good athletes, but usually they don't have the time or the bandwidth to focus on each individual at the capacity they need to first push them to their ability, but also to repeat that success that they had or they've shown they have the potential to have. The mental side, the nutrition, the sleep patterns, the mechanical compensations, and then identifying the obvious things like fatigue, which if you don't have a good system aren't very obvious because you just expect an athlete to bounce back the same way they do every week or every weekend. And that's where we live in those variables. It's extremely challenging and it seems pretty obvious, but for the most part, I'd say a lot of athletes don't really consider those things until they've either been injured or they're at kind of a break point with their performance. They're not getting opportunities. Um, Injuries, like I said, they're inevitable in the sport, not for each person, but they're inevitable because you can't account for, you know, how an athlete slept on their arm and they wake up and they had a weird bus ride and, you know, they're throwing differently or they were messing around in warm-ups and something tweaked a little bit and they just put so much force into their arm and something gives. that's that's the reality of it, but what we're trying to identify are those trends. And that's the benefit of having all the data and someone like you in their corner is hopefully you've created a great enough rapport where you have a track record of knowing how this athlete reacts to stimulus. You have a track record of understanding different windows of adaptation and how they've been able to push a little bit or if it's beneficial or not in the different ways they train with their strength, their mobility, their throwing, etc. And then we can change based off those trends. One of the overlying things that happens in a lot of programs is they might have a TrackMan or a Rapsodo or a strength program or a HIT tracks, but any changes that are happening based off of that are very minimal. And we even see that in big college and high school programs where they have the information, but their coaches are worried about making sure they're on their PFPs and their bunties and first and thirds and running offenses and doing some scouting and doing some recruiting. So they're not really worried about the 5% drop in B cell strength in the guy's arm. They're saying, okay, well, he'll manage it. And whether he did or not is kind of up to the individual. And the other variables become pretty big. So there's so much to have to consider here. It's hard to unpack all of it. Um, but the overlying perspective that kept coming back to my mind as you're talking is that there's no one size fits all in everything. And most programs have an overlying plan, but no plan is infallible or perfect for everyone.
Yeah,
Right?
and there's
that's
everybody
that's kind
has
of
like the one size fits all like
yeah,
arm care routine. You know, it's like, all right, do the
yeah,
Joe exercises. That's how it was when I was younger. Do your
yeah,
light dumbbells and and then J bands came into play and you're not supposed to grip for some reason. They came up with I still don't understand the science behind that part where you just have the thing around your wrist. Um, but we know like gripping stuff helps with your turning on the right muscles, turning the wrong muscles off that you don't want to use when you're trying to, work muscles of the rotator cuff and around the scap and stuff like that. So, that's why and that's where we just keep going back to testing, right? We have a program, we retest our strength. So it's like every 4 weeks you do some plyometric movements, maybe some jump testing, you do some VBT. We see how you're moving weight based on the strength program you just did for the last 4 weeks. We'll test your velocity, hey, you're working on some mechanical things. We test this. We'll see, all right, well, now are you throwing harder? Are you throwing more strikes? What is your goal? So is that working? Same thing with hitting. All right, we're putting on strength. We're getting bigger. We're getting stronger. We're working on our hitting mechanics. All right, is the ball coming off our bat harder now? Do we have a higher exit velocity? Are we hitting more line drives? You know, all of these different things we test, retest, but then like we're not retesting arm care, like you're not retesting your health. It's just like, all right, well, here, just keep doing this. This is the same program you're going to do over and over and over. And that's just not the
yeah,
way it should be. You've got to retest that as well.
yeah,
It's like, is that going up? Is that going down? Is it staying the same? And sometimes it's okay to stay the same or just kind of move like this. When you start getting these big spikes, that's
right,
when you got to kind of worry about it. But You got to know, am I doing the right things? When I was playing, when I came back in
Definitely. Definitely.
2021, I was doing the arm care program back then. It was like a earlier version of it, but in season, I noticed my internal rotation strength was going down, um, and my shoulder was actually becoming a little more balanced, but my internal rotation strength went down, and I was just a little bit like, "Oh man, is should it be doing that?" And I think you would rather have it that way because a lot of injuries happen on the decel. We know that. We train even with our strength programs. We train a lot in deceleration because that's really important, especially as a hitter and as a pitcher. Um, but you know, on the arm care side as well, I ended up being like, all right, it's not really a big deal. I didn't have any issues. I never spent a day in the training room at 44 years old. So it was definitely working. But I did have some different things through the course of the season that I wasn't used to in the off season. And those numbers look different. And that is okay. you know, Same with your strength.
Yeah.
You might be able to bench 300 pounds. And in season, I mean, I wouldn't suggest doing a max bench in season. There's just really no point for it, anyways. But I would guarantee in season, you're probably not benching what your max is. You know what I mean? And that's okay. It's okay to lose a little bit because you're gaining it on the field and you're gaining different things. The issue becomes when like I said earlier, you see these big spikes. You maybe you pitch 5 days in a row at the big league level, or maybe you pitched 5 out of 7 days and you weren't comfortable. You knew you're going to have like a heavy workload. Maybe, for me as a lefty, uh, team comes in and they're lefty dominant hitters. So I know I'm going to be busy that series. So maybe I don't lift as much as I normally would because I know my workload on the field is going to be a little heavy, in this series. Those are all of the things that have to happen. They, there's no
Yeah.
other way to do it.
That's
You can't
experience
just
too. That's you knowing
for
that about
sure,
yourself, right? Yeah.
for sure. And obviously, I learned it through a long period of time. But when you are like working with a program or you're working with a coach or a team, these are just the things that need to start happening. If you want to take things serious about injuries, if you don't really care, if you're at the big league level and you're treating players as a commodity, and if they blow out, after 2 good years and you got 2 good years out of them, if that's how you're running your teams and organizations, then so be it. But if you really want to, increase longevity of players, I think that needs to drastically change and you need to start looking. And I think there's a lot of organizations who are doing it very well now. I don't think it's all 30, but there are some doing it. And we've had some experience in talking with some of their coaches and some of their brass and stuff like that over the years, who are doing that more individualized approach. But it's really the only way to do it. And um, And with all this being said, we kind of go back to it really is on the individual as well, because I I know
Yeah.
you've had different experiences in organizations with different college coaches, different pitching coaches for me, different catching coaches for you. You can pick up small things and little things that can help you become a better player. And that's kind of what I did my whole career. So what you see now and what I know is just kind of a big pot of what I learned from either mostly other people. You know what I mean? There are certain things where I learn myself. And if I had to learn things myself, it was usually because I had to learn them the hard way, whether it was on the field stuff, off the field stuff, strength stuff, health stuff, whatever it is. Usually something bad had to happen for you to learn, because you didn't learn it from somebody else. So then you learn yourself and you're like, oh man, that sucks. I had to learn that. But even with my elbow, having Tommy John in 2012, that off season, well, in 2011, I was in Pittsburgh and just, I had never had arm issues. And, 2006 in LA, I threw in 62 games. 2007, I pitched in 82. I don't know. I have my bobblehead box back there. I got the record. 83, I think. I think it was 83 games.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
83 games in 2007. And then 2008, 2009, and 2010. All three of those years I threw in 71 games each, right? Never had any issues, never had any real injuries. I dove for a ball in the rain in 2009 and pulled a hip flexor and went on the DL. But that was really the only injury that I had over the course of my career.
Rockies?
All of a sudden, no, before I got traded, it was in Washington. Yeah, it was freaking pissing out. And somebody tried to bunt on me and I dove in the rain.
Or something. Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah. I think I remember.
Yeah, and I kind of slid up. I dove, caught it, slid up to my knees and threw him out. I thought it was super cool. And then I stood up and I was like, could barely walk. I'm like, oh my God.
Uh-oh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so 2011 comes around and I'm in spring training. I'm playing catch and all of a sudden I just feel something like kind of in my arm here, nothing that there's really anything in there. And it was just bothering me. Ended up having to go on the DL, start the year on the DL, finally got healthy, came back, pitched for a couple months. And I was going into a game in Chicago and just warming up and my elbow, I mean, right there freaking hurt. Like it was, I came in, I like walked the first lefty on 4 pitches and then gave up a homer. I'm like, all right, that's it. I got to get out of here. Ended up getting an MRI again, getting an injection. They said it was, golfer's elbow or whatever. And I just believed them. So that's another lesson here today. Always get a second opinion. That's one thing I regret, not getting a second opinion on that, because I probably could have got that taken care of right then and maybe had surgery. But then,
and on vice versa,
finished out the year.
Happened for me.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say vice versa. I've had that.
Yeah, we're on a little bit of a delay.
I needed to have surgery. Yeah, I could tell.
Yeah.
But yeah, just to add to that, I was saying that I had someone tell me that I need to have surgery, got a second opinion, didn't do it, never had it. So I might have had Tommy John when it wasn't really necessary. So yeah, that's a learning point for a lot of athletes that, definitely you got to consider that.
Yeah, for sure. And for me, I was on a 1-year deal, so I'm sure they were trying to get some value out of me, and not just go pay for a surgery. And so I rehabbed it, came back after the All-Star break, felt pretty good, but never got back to really 100%. And then going into August, it just started hurting again. Like every outing, I started pitching like crap again, and got released going into September, and was just kind of like, whew, thank God, because I didn't want to go back on the DL. It was just one of those years that when you've ever been on the disabled list, or what they call it, the IL now. I still call it the DL for whatever reason, but if you're on the injured list, it's not fun, and it can really put a damper on your season if you spend too much time on there. But and then we played catch that off season. We're throwing, and I was just up and down. Good day, bad day, 2 good days, 5 bad days. Went into spring training and pitched well, but completely blew out at that point. And I remember getting the MRI, and the Dr. Meister, the Texas Rangers orthopedic surgeon was just like, "What the heck? Like, how are you pitching? Your elbow is completely blown out." Went got a second
Yeah.
opinion because I learned my lesson the year before. Dr. Andrews, he's like, "Oh my gosh, like your elbow is basically screwed. There's nothing left in there." And one of my whole points to this is every once in a while you might have a freak injury where it's just like something snaps. That definitely happens. And it happens with
Yeah.
knees and it happens with different things. But for the most part, this stuff is like build up over time. And a lot of times the body adapts. You can get really strong in certain areas and can protect that UCL for a long time. And I think that's kind of what I did. And then finally it just had enough and it snapped. And when I talked to Dr. Andrews, he was like, "Oh, you with the amount of damage in there, you have been pitching with a tear for at least 4 years." And then, I kind of snapped back and like, "Oh yeah, I remember when I was with the Dodgers, I was pitching in Arizona. We were facing the Diamondbacks and I was out on the mound and I threw a pitch and it felt like somebody just like there was a wire in my elbow or something and somebody just pulled it back or like a rubber band and just like let it go and it just like snapped and then like kind of shocked my whole body and my arm." And I was like, "Oh my gosh," it was just after one pitch. And I was like, "What the heck was that?" And I remember telling the trainers and they were just like, "Well, that doesn't sound good. So we're going to give you off tomorrow. You're not going to pitch tomorrow. You'll come in the next day. We'll have you throw. And if everything is fine, then you're just fine. Well, if you have pain, then we'll check it out or we'll give you some tests. But if not, then just keep going with whatever you're doing." And I came in the next day and, had a day off and then threw the day after and I was fine. But I was just like, yeah, that's probably when it happened, like when I first tore something and then it just gradually gets worse, gets worse. So, with all of that being said, that is absolutely why, and I will reiterate this again, it is important to test that and know what's going on with your body, with your elbow. So when things do happen like that, you can make those adjustments and you don't have to rely on everybody else around you to tell you something's wrong. You can figure it out first and then know how to attack it before it turns into an issue. Because you probably had this as well when you were in the minor leagues or when you were playing in spring training. You go in and you would do all these different tests. And then, um, I even remember in Seattle, they did they tested my extension, flexion, different strength in my shoulder. And then I was having kind of an issue in Seattle my second year. And they're like, "Oh, yeah, well, your strength is dead." They didn't test me until I got hurt. And then they're like, "Oh, okay, so your strength's down a little bit. You lost range of motion in your elbow." And it's just by that point, you're like, "Yeah, no shit." But it's too late. You haven't been, you should have been making those adjustments. I should have known that it was getting worse or, I was losing different range of motion or different strength through the course of the season. So that's where, I think the game is kind of turning and hopefully we can keep people healthier. But if you're not doing that, then you have literally no chance of ever anything good happening on that end of things.
Yeah. Yeah. I I agree with you on so many of those things. I mean, I guess something to take away from this is that the catch is you need to develop a routine. You have to. You have to have some way to have a baseline understanding of how to keep yourself near the higher level of your ability, of your performance, staying healthy, staying mentally locked in. Having a routine is at the core of what you're trying to accomplish. Then the next thing is understanding that that routine is only as good as how often you reevaluate if it's working for you. You have to be able to adapt and adjust to the just unlimited amount of variables that are going to come up. Um,
Yeah, no
and
doubt.
then making sure you have some level of accountability to it, because I was always, just for an example for myself, like a just do more, maximum effort. Like, okay, well, if I need to get in better shape, I'm just going to do some sprints, go run, go lift heavier, lift more often. And I didn't realize this, and probably till it was too late, that more is not better. And doing something because it's how you've always done it is not better. Better is better. If you're trying to throw harder, if you're trying to hit better, if you're trying to play in the big leagues, you have to understand what is happening, what you've been doing, and then evaluate if it's working or not. And at the core value of what we do at Beimel Elite Athletics, that constantly happens. We're always reevaluating, reassessing, repositioning, retargeting the goals versus the process, and trying to take the bias or the ego out of it. So if something just simply isn't working for someone, we have to change. And if it stopped working for someone, that's where a lot of other programs they falter, because they don't have a backup plan, or they don't have the way to pivot for one or two or three people. It's just, hey, this is how we do things. This is how we lift. This is how we warm up. This is how we do our conditioning. This is how you wear your pants. It's just the same thing happens in some of
Yeah.
these facilities that they train people because they do it the way they do it, or they don't have the experience to maneuver once variables come up. But key takeaway, more is not better. Better is better. So remember that for sure.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, we haven't even touched on, and this is something we can touch on later because we're kind of running out of time, but
Yeah. Yeah. I got
even
to
just
wrap up.
having a good recovery routine is so
Yep.
beneficial from battling, just keeping yourself healthy and keeping your performance up. We don't need to get into that right now, but biggest thing for me, if you want to stay healthy, one, get freaking strong, and that's not strong where you're benching 300, you're squatting 400 and deadlifting 500 pounds. That's cool, but that's not going to keep you healthy
Yeah.
on a baseball field.
Gonna be
So
hard to kill for sure.
you are, yeah, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Um,
You don't want to
but
fight that
it's
guy.
not just those bigger, exactly, that guy's going to kick your ass. But uh, those are good. I mean, don't get me wrong; those are good places to start. Those are good muscles to get strong. But we're not even just talking about the large muscles. We're talking about, your anterior core strength. That has to be strong. Has to. The smaller muscles, even just going into your grip strength or your pinch grip strength, which for whatever reason, I PR'd yesterday my pinch grip on the arm care. Have, I don't know how many tests over the years, and all of a sudden at 48, my pinch grip strength is the highest it's ever been. Kind of crazy. But just even the smallest muscles that you don't realize, muscles you use to rotate, that's a big one. The muscles that you use to stop you from rotating, um, huge. You just don't realize like every little thing. The muscles in your feet, you wear like normal shoes and your toes just sit in there like this, and your feet get lazy instead of like your feet being able to do this as you're walking. It's just certain muscles become atrophied when you don't use them, and it can throw off your, not only your strength, it can throw off your entire posture in your whole body. Something in your foot or your hip or your glute can throw off something in your shoulder. You know, you can start to have shoulder injuries because maybe one of your glutes isn't firing. So it's not just, when I say get strong, it's not just, like I said, being able to bench a shit ton or squat a shit ton. Those aren't necessarily going to help you on the field, with your strength and coordination, but they're good places to start. And that's usually where we start the younger guys, with a base of strength, um, and more routines than anything, those strength routines. So get strong in every single possible way that you
Yep.
can. That's number one. Like the guys from Arm Care and Ryan Croton always say strength matters most. It's not a slogan. It's for real. It does. That sets up every single thing after that. So most important, staying healthy, getting strong. Um, Another is being able to say no. I think we see a lot of kids, they just feel like a coach is kind of their superior, which they are. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying like, tell your coach off or something or try to act like you know more than your coach. That's not that's not the case. But you have to be able to say no, like I can't pitch today, or if you don't feel good, or you've already thrown. If you threw on Tuesday, you have to be able to go, no, I can't pitch today. I'm not pitching on Thursday. I had to learn that at the big league level. I came up at my rookie year. I just wanted to be available every single day. That was part of being in the bullpen. You were just ready to go. And there were times I wasn't. There's no way I should have been out there, but I was like, yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I'm ready for tonight. And then, I would go out there, and I think I've told this story before, but I had a streak where I was up or in the game 21 out of 23 days one year. And the 2 days that I didn't get up or go in were off days. So they couldn't get me up if they wanted. But after that, I just freaking took a dive, like it was bad. I went from having a good year to then just having an absolute crap year because I didn't say no. Didn't say like, hey, I need a day. So after that year, I made a rule for myself that I would never pitch more than 3 days in a row. And 3 days in a row is plenty. And a lot of organizations, I don't think they let you do that anymore. But I would throw 3 days in a row unless we were going down the stretch and we were trying to make the playoffs. And if I needed to pitch like a fourth day or something like that, I would make an exception. But I set that rule for myself, and then still I threw in 83 games, but never threw in more than 4 games in a row or more than 3 games in a row. So you still can pitch a lot, but I felt like 3 days was a max for me. I needed, and analytics would probably tell you different. I probably shouldn't pitch more than 1 day in a row, but there were days where, my team needed me to come get one guy out. And it's like, yeah, I can get one guy out today. And I would say these kind of things to the pitching coach and to the manager. So don't be afraid to kind of stick up for yourself. Don't be afraid to say no if you're not feeling good. You don't need to try and be a hero, especially if you have goals to pitch at a higher level, because you're only going to do yourself a disservice. And even if you get that one big out and everybody's patting you on the back, it's going to have, sometimes it comes with a cost, and it might not be right then, but it might be further down the road. So, um, remember that. And then I'd say the third biggest thing is just test and retest and reevaluate what you were talking about earlier. Have your routines. You got to have routines, but you also have to be willing to adjust those routines if they're not working.
Yeah.
And that's not to say you got to like every time you throw bad or you have a bad game, you got to be like, oh, geez, I need to scrap everything I've been doing and do something else. That's not the case. It's just have objective data that you can look at and you can go like, hey, I'm not getting, my arm strength isn't getting better. It's getting worse. So obviously this band routine or these plyo balls that I'm doing, they're not helping me anymore. They're no longer serving me, and it's okay to like switch that type of stuff up. I do that all the time. You know, Even with our athletes, they think, well, oh, I got to do my plyo throws. No, you don't. You don't need to do those every single day. It's okay to switch it up. Like every once in a while, I'll just throw a baseball because I'm like, my body's kind of getting burned out. Or what is my arm care saying? What is my strength saying? And sometimes you need a break from all that stuff and you need to just focus on throwing a baseball. That's what you're going to have to do when you get out there. When you get on the field, you're not throwing like a 7-ounce
Gotta
ball at
compete.
any point.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got to compete. You've got to just learn what you need to get better at. So for me, I'd say it goes in way deeper, obviously, but I say those three things are a place to start. And then the fourth, which I think we'll touch on in a later episode, is just having a recovery routine and know what you're doing. Obviously, sleep, hydrating with good water. All water isn't created equal. Um, just in case
That's for
people
sure.
don't know that out there, there's different water. There's acidic water. There's alkaline water. There's bottled water that's got crap in it. There's so
Yeah.
many
Chemically
different things that you
treated,
can drink
dead
for
water.
sure. Absolutely. So it's just learning all of those things, and having that recovery. You can't beat sleep, can't beat hydrating, you can't beat eating good foods, whole foods, nutritious foods, those type of things. And then we can get in, later on different kinds of tools, recovery tools, and things like that.
Yeah.
And that could be a fun episode to kind of go with what we've used over the years, what that we found personally works. Um, because there are so many things out there, and I get asked all the time about different recovery things, and I have the ones that I love that have worked for me. But other people have other things that they like to use, and I've basically used everything because I always wanted to kind of have that edge and I always wanted to feel good. So I have an opinion on most things. Never a lack of opinion from me, but um, you know, we have a lot of stuff that we use in our facility as well because it's because there's studies that show that it works. It's not just like, oh, this makes me feel better, but you don't have like any data or anything that backs that up.
Yeah. I mean, I think this can be a whole series of conversations about strength and recovery and routine because they're all intertwined. And then so you can dive into the smaller details for how exactly to execute it. I think that's what resonated for me is I think about a lot of the parents that I have conversations with, high school, younger college parents, or parents of college athletes. Um, some of them have a lot more knowledge than others as far as how the performance world and baseball world really works. And a lot of them, I'd say the majority of them, come from the, I guess, experience they have with the lessons dynamic. And that's usually the first tool that they can go to. Hey, he needs help with this. So we need him to do a lesson with his pitching. And that's a good starting point. I mean, you're just trying to get some entry level information. But something I'd ask is, well, how many college and pro and
Right.
big league guys you see getting a lesson here? Zero? One? Ever? So why should it work for this level of athlete? This is for like 10-year-olds, for foundational guys. And don't get me wrong, there's some people that
Mhm.
really take their mentorship seriously and they've known an athlete for a long time and they can deliver some value. But the reality is there has to be some level of continuation and actionable steps that are taken once you've gotten that information. So I would recommend, like you said, get an evaluation on your strength. And it doesn't have to be your deadlift or bench press. It can be your arm strength. It can be your hip strength, your hamstring strength, something that's relative to your performance goal, and always tie it back to the performance goal on what the actionable steps are going to be based off of that. Strength is never a weakness, but strength that takes away from your movements, that doesn't have repeatability, that doesn't have the capacity to sustain the level of volume you have in your usage, that can be a problem. So you need to build the engine and the capacity, and the strength is always a great place to start. The issue and the trick is at some point, it has to be very targeted because it isn't obvious. And you go to a gym, we have a lot of athletes that go to gyms and they work out at public gyms or just strength facilities. But at a certain point, they start losing the value of it because the adaptations aren't gain 20 pounds, put 15 pounds on your PR, doing the same trap bar deadlift and med ball throws and whatever bench press routines as everyone else. It's very intricately detailed around the individual stimulus and what they need. And I think we should continue this another episode because we can probably go down the rabbit hole for like a couple hours. But
Yeah.
if you're an athlete or you're a parent of an athlete looking for a starting point, get some data, get some information, and get some strategy behind it. That would be a good starting point to understand if this is going to align with your short term objective goals and the long term value that you would have as an athlete on what it could provide or what it could help you sustain. Because there's a lot of athletes that can throw 90 once or they've done it and then they change everything or they don't have the variables understood or they don't have a routine established enough to keep them from dipping, and then they start to up and down perform or up and down with health, risk injury or risk losing their opportunity. And that's a very preventable process if you just have information and strategy that kind of grow with you. Right.
Yep. No doubt. Absolutely. All right. Well, let's put a pin in this for now. I know you got
Oh
stuff to
man.
do. I
Yeah.
got
Just getting
stuff to do.
started. I feel like we both got
Um,
things to get to. Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, good episode there. A lot of information. I think this is probably where I say make sure you like and subscribe. Um,
Oh yeah. That's right.
I think we're
Or
supposed to
not.
say that
Do
earlier,
whatever you want to do.
like halfway through. This is Joe.
Yeah.
Yeah, or not. Like and subscribe. Um, help the algorithm help us. I
Yeah.
watch a lot of bowling
Comment your hate
content
too.
and
That's
all
fine.
those
It all
guys.
helps the algorithm. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Tell us we're crazy. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, man. All right. Well, we'll stop right there, and
Well, yeah.
yeah, here we go.
BeimelEliteAthletics.com if you got any questions.
That's right.
All right, man.